Well, hello there, and welcome to the Great Pop Culture Discussion, a spin off of the Great Pop Culture Debate, where we talk to creators about their works and what in pop culture inspires and excites them. I'm your host, Eric Resniak, and I am here with comic book author David Pepose. Welcome, David.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It is literally our pleasure. So, in case you do not know, David is currently the writer of Speed Racer from Mad Cave, Space Ghost and Captain Planet from Dynamite Entertainment, and the upcoming 10-ton Titan Terrier from Paper Cuts, which I believe is an imprint for Mad Cave,
Yep,
correct?
that's right.
Yeah, and if you have not checked out Mad Cave's publishing schedule, by the way, they're awesome. They have amazing books. They've got licensed stuff, they've got original stuff, and I'm always blown away by what they're putting out there.
They're a great company and just a really good crew to boot. And so it's nice to be a part of a publisher that's got so many amazing books coming out and such a wonderful team to work with.
And also for all ages, and they're also very demographically kind of broad, right?
Yeah. It really is. I think I see Mad Cave as a real example for a lot of the industry, and I think you see it just from the people who work there. They're happy to work there. They really go the extra mile for the books and for the creators, and so I love working at Mad Cave. It's a real love fest working with them, and I'll work with them as long as they'll have me.
Yeah, I got to meet some of them at San Diego Comic Con a couple weeks back, and they seem like really awesome folks. So check out Mad Cave and their various kind of publishing influences. Speed Racer 2 is out this week, am I right?
Yes, it is coming out this Wednesday.
So I have to know, what kind of car do you drive?
I drive a Prius. I like the least flashy or dramatic car for the writer of Speed Racer to drive. But I did my first car was a an '88 Pontiac Fiero, a little
Okay.
two-seater stick shift. And I definitely felt like Speed Racer driving that thing. So yeah, I do. I think I come by a little bit of this, honestly. I'm certainly a Speed Racer writer who knows how to drive stick.
Okay, that is important. My follow up question to that was, did you or do you wear an ascot while driving one of these rides?
I only wear an ascot when I'm not driving.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's yeah.
Important
I'm a
distinction.
never ascot while driving.
You know what? We have to have limits in our life, and I appreciate that. So, between Speed Racer and Space Ghost and
Yeah.
Captain Planet, you kind of have developed this little niche for yourself, intentionally or unintentionally, for these kind of Gen X nostalgia books right now. But you yourself are not Gen X,
I
correct?
am not. I am purely millennial trash. It's funny. There's only so much you can control when you have a career in comics. That's a lesson that I continually learn and relearn. And so for me, this really was like a confluence of a lot of different things coming together. It started with Space Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
I had known Nick Barucci over at Dynamite for many years, dating back to my comics journalism days. And every time when I made the leap to becoming a writer, I would always send Nick, copies of my books. And I just worked on Moon Knight, City of the Dead, and my Punisher miniseries over at Marvel. And Dynamite, meanwhile, had just struck this deal with Warner Brothers Discovery to tackle a bunch of their licenses. And
Mm-hmm.
so Nick was the one who said to my editor Joe Rybant, like, "Hey, like, why don't we give David a shot? Let's see what he can do on Space Ghost." And I was able to kind of take all the lessons that I had picked up at Marvel and really kind of put them into practice on a much longer runway than I had had before. And so, with the success of that came Speed Racer.
Mm-hmm.
I had worked at Mad Cave on a book called The Devil That Wears My Face, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful experience. I have known Mike Martz, the editor in chief at Mad Cave, when he was my intern supervisor in college, back when
Wild.
we were at DC. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I'd worked with him on Scout's Honor over at Aftershock. And so that was a great experience. And Mad Cave wanted to find another project to work with. So Speed Racer kind of, they approached me with that. And that same week at San Diego Comic Con, Dynamite announced they'd picked up the rights to Captain Planet. And that's been a bucket list book for me to tackle for a long time. And so I demanded that they give me that book. And so, yeah, patterns just kind of arise, sometimes within your control, but most of the time without. Um, but it's nice. I think, something there's something always timeless and elemental about these classic properties. And for me, I see it as just as much as pop culture archaeology as I do writing,
Yeah,
where you really do have to figure out, like, there's nothing broken about any of these things. The
right.
bones are as solid as they ever were. It's just kind of figuring out how do you kind of dust them off and add just a little bit of polish until they're sparkling like new.
Yeah, that's such a great way of putting it. I was going to ask, working with these kind of beloved properties that have been
Yeah.
around, in the case of Space Ghost, we're talking probably at this point 50 years, maybe more. How do
Yeah,
you write them?
it was the '60s that it came out,
Yeah,
on the heels of Adam West's Batman.
yeah, yeah. How do you find that kind of balance between, yes, you want to do something new with the character, but they have such an established fandom that you can't really go too crazy with it, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like a lot of my books are not necessarily meant for purists.
Mm,
I think that's like a core philosophy of mine is like it would be, I'm not going to say easy, but it's a choice to just be like, I'm going to just do a continuation of the show exactly as the
yeah,
show did it. And I feel like, because I'm a millennial, I was not there during the heyday,
hmm,
during all this. And so it feels like I would never be able to nail that tone. And even if I did, I'm showing up to the party decades late and trying to
sure,
beat the original creators at their own game.
yeah,
So for me, I watched every episode of Space Ghost and every episode of Speed Racer. I grew up with Captain Planet, so like
hmm,
that I do a little bit more through my own memories. But um, I just watched it and I guess kind of let all of it kind of wash over me. Just a sense of like what stands out, what's the deal with all these characters. I was taking detailed notes on every single episode, and then kind of just letting it kind of roll in my head a little bit of just Space Ghost is a great example because of all the villains and figuring out,
yeah,
all right, Zorak, for example, what about him stands out? It's kind of this weird, off-putting, unsettling personality because he's a giant praying mantis. His brain is not wired like a human brain. All
yep,
right, how do we kind of extrapolate that alien perspective? He's a cult leader. He's the Charles Manson of space. And oh, hey, he's worshiping Lokar, as this
hmm,
sort of, Cthulhu, a nihilist insect god from another dimension. That's kind of how you riff on that for all the different villains, and then you figure out what's the emotional spine of the whole story, which is kind of this Jurassic Park, Dr. Grant, Tim and Lex dynamic of a widower and two orphans. First they're kind of there's some friction, but then they become a found family. So you really kind of have to do that. Like as a creator, you are kind of the prism of like
yeah,
what's the meaning, what's the tone, what's the interpretation. Like you drink up all the source material, and then you kind of just figure out like, all right, what's standing out to what appeals to me, what's the journey that I can kind of take, and like for Speed Racer, I kind of knew going in, I was like, this is going to be Rocky in a race car. This is going to be sort
mm,
of there. It's a sports book with some
hmm,
crime undercurrents, but it really is a sports book of just seeing Speed's hero's journey from doing these underground illegal back alley street races to becoming a Formula X champion and all the
yeah.
trials and tribulations along the way. So, like I said, there's nothing broken about any of these properties. I think it's just finding like what's the things that make them cool, and then just saying, all right, in the year 2025, how would I tell that story?
Yeah, it's such a great point. This is a controversial question, but Speed Racer movie from the Wachowskis, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Work of art, ahead of its time.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
Yes.
listen. I understand why that movie might be an acquired taste, and I think it was, like it came out the same week as Iron Man 1. So
Right.
talk about like the world's worst timing to try to debut that movie. Um, it's avant-garde. I think the Wachowskis did something really interesting and cool with that. You know, um, I understand why there are some people who didn't get it, but I think there are some really interesting, cool themes to that. The idea of like speed, not just as a driver, but as an artist behind the wheel. That's something that I think is very resonant to me as a writer. And just seeing the way that they push the envelope so hard with the visuals.
Yeah.
Again, it's very counterculture in a way. I understand why there are people that don't get it, but I think as far as like an artistic statement, as far as a technical achievement, Speed Racer, like you have to see that movie.
Yep.
So I certainly watched it when I was sort of mainlining all the Speed Racer media that I could. And while I can't draw specifically from that movie because of like the rights of it all,
Sure.
um, there are certainly some themes and inspirations that I definitely took.
Awesome. So, are there other properties that are out there that you're like, ooh, I would love to work on that one?
Well,
You said Planet,
yeah.
Captain Planet was like the big one, but any others?
Yeah, I'd love to do something with the turtles. I grew up in like the heyday of like Turtle Mania, and so I'd love to
Yep.
do something with them. Power Rangers could be kind of fun. Um, Voltron could probably be interesting.
Oh,
Um, and then of course, like there's a million Marvel and DC things that I'd love to tackle. I haven't done any work at DC yet, and so I got my start there as an intern. I'd love to do something over there, and Marvel, like I'd love to do more with Spider-Man. I got to write Peter once in Spider-Verse Unlimited, and I've written Miles a few times. Wolverine is sort of a bucket lister. I've never played with him. Doctor Strange is something that I've been like desperate to write for many years. Um, Ghost Rider, ForceWorks. I have a ForceWorks pitch in my back pocket that
Forceworks.
they'll,
Wow,
they'll
that's a
never
name I
let me
haven't
write,
heard.
but I would love to do it. So, Carnage is another one.
Sure.
So yeah, there's like a million different things, but I have found that it's always better to not think about it. Um,
Mm.
I find that if you're trying to sort of game out like a thing in advance, it always winds up not being exactly what you thought it would be because
Hmm.
you've gamed it out at a certain stage of your skill and experience. And of course, if it comes many years later, you're not as limber about it. So I try to kind of keep myself open because my favorite books are the ones that I never saw coming.
Can you tell me about what some of those are?
Yeah. Well, like I said, Space Ghost, for example, I had no idea that I was ever going to get offered that. And Speed Racer is another one. And I feel like I'm really enjoying the work I'm doing on both of those books. Whereas like there are other books that I've done that I'm still very proud of them, but I see looking back on them, those were the ones that like earlier I was like it took me less time to say, oh, hey, that's something I could have done differently, but I kind of had this preconceived notion of what I was getting myself into. And again, I don't think I've ever had a book that I like don't like, but I think it's natural as a creator to sort of look back at your past work and be like, I wasn't experienced enough. I could have done this differently had I had the skills that I have today. But I think, yeah, the books that I've kept myself the most limber and the ones that were most unexpected, those are the ones that, Savage Avengers is another one
Yeah.
where I'm like, oh, I had no idea, that was ever coming down the turnpike, but I'm so happy with how that book came together. So it really is kind of, trying to make a plan in comics is a sure way to get your heart broken. So I just really just try to write my best and, just try to knock on doors and try to go along for the ride when opportunities fall in my lap.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the life of a freelance creator, right? Is you just
Yep.
kind of have to get out there and do it. You actually started, you kind of alluded to this as
Yeah.
a reporter, right? In comic books.
Yeah. Well, so my first job in the comics industry was I was actually an editorial intern at DC. I
Hmm.
worked on books like Batman, R.I.P., and Final Crisis, and Green Lantern: Secret Origin, and Supergirl Adventures in the Eighth Grade. And then that was right as the recession hit of '08.
Yeah.
And so there were no jobs to be had. And so what I wound up doing was I met Janelle Asselin, who had joined up in the Batman office right around when I started. And she was an alumni at Newsarama. So she introduced me to her editor and my mentor, Troy Brownfield. And, I wrote reviews at Newsarama and wound up becoming the reviews editor there for many years. And it was a great boot camp. It really kind of like taught me how to, not just read a comic, but to articulate what do I like about it? What don't I like about it? Seeing other tools that creators would use and kind of adding them to my toolbox. And at the same time, it was double edged because I think what happened was a lot of editors, when I decided maybe I'll take a shot at writing something. It took me a long time to kind of come to that conclusion. I thought for a long time I wanted to be an editor, and then I realized that those are the editorial roles are the hardest part of my job for creator-owned
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yep.
if somebody else can do that full time, they deserve a Purple Heart. But there were a lot of editors who I think when I was starting out were like, I don't know if he could do the job, he'd have done the job rather than being a reviewer. And
Interesting.
for me, it was more of just I grew up in the Midwest and I had no creative role model, so to speak. So it took me many years to even for it to even occur to me, oh, hey, what if you took a shot at this? So, but I do think like in terms of strengthening up my voice, I think reviewing was a huge help. I think it still really influences a lot of how I approach things because every book I write, especially when I'm writing it out and then I'm doing the lettering pass, I think what would my response be if I was just reading this, if I wasn't involved in this whatsoever? And I think that's really served me well over the course of my career.
That's a very cool lens to take with it. And I don't know many folks who have come from the critical side to the creative side because that's bold and frankly, you took a big leap there.
There's a few really talented names who have done it. Gail Simone, Kelly
Mm.
Thompson, Ryan K. Lindsay are a few names that just kind of spring to mind. Joey Esposito, who has been burning up the all the awards categories with the pedestrian. Got his start at IGN.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think there's a long tradition of comics journalists becoming creators. I mean, you can even say I want to say it was Paul Levitz. I think he started off in the fanzine world.
Hmm.
So there really is like it's a long tradition of that. I know a lot of people don't remember that, but yeah. So it's a nice tradition to be a part of for sure.
That's very cool. So you've done several original series yourself.
Yeah.
You did Spencer and Locke, the OZ, Going to the Chapel. Any more original projects coming up that you want to talk about?
Sure. Well, we've got 10 Ton Titan Terrier, which is going to be coming out in October. And that's my first all ages graphic novel. I tried to pitch it as like, very much a Pixar kind of tone. Like, if you like The Incredibles, then you should be just fine with Terrier. I pitched it as Pokemon meets Pacific Rim.
Cool.
Instead of Ash and Pikachu, it's a scientist and his dog, and instead of being able to throw lightning, the dog can pilot a 10-ton alien battle suit. Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, it really is the story about a boy and his dog, and just sort of figuring out like how do you evolve your dynamic from being like codependent to like something a little more functional. Yeah, it's very autobiographical. I wrote it about my terrier, Holly,
Oh,
who passed right before the COVID shutdowns.
oh
Um,
gosh.
I wrote this kind of in honor of her.
Mm-hmm.
She had melanoma and she fought that for about a year. I would take her to her radiation appointments, and I remember thinking, I don't know if I can save my dog, but if I'm feeling this powerless, maybe I can make her immortal. And so that
Oh,
really kind of became like the impetus behind this book. And also the fact that, I wrote Spencer and Locke, which is like Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City. And like, I was very tired of like having kids like trying to come up to my table and be like, Catman, and me having to say, like, there's no way you can
no.
read this unless you get real cool with a lot of stuff real fast. So it does my heart good to be able to like, have written a book that I can give my 8-year-old niece. So yeah, I'm really excited for that book. Artist Ornella Greco did such an amazing job on that book, and yeah, I can't wait for people to read it October 7th.
That's awesome. So you were just mentioning artists. Are there any artists that you've worked with a lot of great ones? Are
Yeah,
there any artists alive or dead where you're like, ooh, I would love to work with this person?
boy. Yeah, because I've worked with some amazing artists. Jonathan Lau on Space Ghost is just a juggernaut. I love working with him. He's such an amazing storyteller. David Tinto on Speed Racer is sensational. And Aman Casalos, I think, does not get nearly enough credit for the amazing work that he does in Captain Planet. As far as artists that I would like to work with, I was just talking about Sebastian Paris the other day. He did a cover for us for Speed Racer, but he and I have kind of come up, around the same time, and I'm always, I love his work. Steve McNiven, I saw what
Mm,
he did on that Daredevil Cold Day in Hell, but I've been a huge fan of his for a very long time.
sure.
Um, you know, uh, uh, I would love to, I don't know if I've been lucky enough to get a cover from John Romita Jr. I would love to do a short with him. I don't think he would work with me for anything longer than that. But I've been really lucky. I have worked with some really talented artists. Leonardo Romero was amazing to
Mhm.
work with. Carlos Magno on Savage Avengers was
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
Dave Wachter on Punisher was just amazing. Hit the ground running from the jump. So, similar to your earlier question about like what properties I'd want to work with, that's the great thing about artists, and the great thing about editors is I don't know where all the bodies are buried. I've had a couple of times where I've been able to successfully like call my shot, but it's rarer than you think.
Sure.
Whereas like the editors know who's available, who's on budget, who they know of a lot of people that I don't know of. And so I've been very fortunate, Tom Brevoort and Joe Rybant and Chaz Pangburn, they've all done great, jobs casting the books. And I will say, Alex Cormack, who I forgot to shout out, he is also one of the most talented artists I've ever worked with on Devil That Wears My Face. So he's sensational, and we're looking to work together on something else, hopefully sooner versus later.
Awesome. Well, that's a lot of artists for people to check out. We are almost out of time, and I always have to ask this question. What is one pop culture recommendation you have right now, movies, albums, video games, whatever, that you think everyone should check out because you love it so much?
Yeah, my favorite movies that have come out this year, I love Companion. That's my favorite movie of the year. I love how it plays fair with the audience. The rules are so interestingly set up and then subverted. Another thing I just saw recently is the movie Host, which is a seance done over Zoom, and it's a very short horror movie. It's only about an hour. It's sensational. I highly recommend it.
I have been on a few Zoom calls where the connectivity is so difficult they might as well be dead, honestly. So, excellent. Thank you so much. David, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great to get to know you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course, check out Speed Racer #2. It's out this week. Check out Space Ghost. Check out Captain Planet, both from Dynamite. Check out 10-Ton Titan Terrier. Am I a Terrier
That's
Titan?
right. That's right.
Coming out soon from Paper Cuts. And for more comic recommendations, check out our panel discussion posts that come out every Wednesday on Blue Sky or Instagram. And to find out what's new in pop culture in general, sign up for our weekly newsletter via our website, greatpopculturedebate.com. Have a good one, everyone. And remember, everyone should enjoy pop culture. Now, let's go, Speed Racer. Go.